The Arizona sun did not shine. It hammered the earth. It beat down upon the anvil of the red desert until the air shimmered with a heat that could warp a man's vision and cook the hope right out of his marrow. It was the year 1885, and the land was screaming. The scream was not human. It was mechanical, a high-pitched, grinding shriek of iron wheels against iron tracks. The Silver Star rail line was carving a scar through the heart of the territory, slicing through the ancestral hunting grounds of the Apache, blasting apart the silence of the canyons with dynamite and ambition. High atop a sandstone ridge, watching the black smoke stain the pristine blue sky, sat a man who belonged to neither the smoke nor the stone. His name was Cade Nantan. The army officers at Fort Wingate called him Cade. His people called him a traitor. He sat atop a paint horse that stood as still as a statue, the animals breathing the only rhythm in the heat. Cade wore the blue wool jacket of a United States Army scout, but he had cut the sleeves off to reveal arms that were brown and corded with muscle, marked by the sun and the scars of a life lived on the edge of a knife. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, held back by a strip of red cloth. His face was a map of hard choices, the jaw set tight, the eyes dark and unreadable. They said his heart was made of stone. Cade had let them believe it. A heart of stone did not bleed when his cousin spat at his shadow. A heart of stone did not break when the soldiers he guided laughed about civilizing the savages. He had locked his emotions away in a deep, dark box within his chest, a necessary survival tactic. He scouted for the army not because he loved the white man, but because he had calculated, with cold precision, that this was the only way to keep the remainder of his tribe from being wiped off the face of the earth. If he guided the soldiers, he could steer them away from the women and children. He could navigate the storm. But the storm was getting stronger. Below him, the track layers worked like ants, and the land groaned. Cade turned his horse away. He had a patrol to finish, and the taste of coal dust was bitter on his tongue. 10 miles east, in the dusty, struggling settlement of Silver Creek, Clara Whitfield stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, trying to brush the red dust from her skirts. It was a futile task. The dust in the New Mexico territory was not merely dirt. It was a pervasive entity that found its way into water barrels, into locked trunks, and into the pores of one's skin. Clara was 19 years old. She possessed a beauty that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape, a softness that belonged to the green lawns of Boston or the parlors of Philadelphia. Her skin was fair, though currently flushed from the oppressive heat, and her eyes were the color of the sky after a rainstorm, clear and impossibly hopeful. She had been sent west 6 months ago to care for her father, Thomas, after her mother had passed away back east. She had brought with her crates of books, a porcelain tea set that had already chipped, and a head full of romantic notions about the frontier. She believed in the innate goodness of people. She believed that the West was a grand adventure. She believed that the Native Americans were exactly as the dime novels portrayed them, fierce, bloodthirsty warriors who needed to be feared. Yet she harbored a secret, terrifying curiosity about the people who had walked this sand before she was born. Inside the house, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Clara paused at the door, her hand hovering over the latch. She could hear her father's voice, strained and desperate. "I cannot sell at that price, Silas. It would leave me with nothing. This ranch is all I have left to leave my girl," a second voice answered, smooth as oil and cold as a snake's belly. "Thomas, you are looking at this emotionally, not logically. The Silver Star rail is coming through. The company needs water rights. They need the land adjacent to the canyon. You are $5,000 in debt. The bank holds your paper, and I hold the bank." Clara pushed the door open. Her father, Thomas Whitfield, looked 10 years older than his 50 years. His hair was thinning and gray, his face lined with the stress of a man trying to hold back a landslide with a pitchfork. Standing opposite him was Silas Crowley. Crowley was a man who wore expensive suits in a land of denim and leather. He was the regional manager for the railroad, a man with a face that was handsome in a predatory way. with manicured hands that had never held a shovel but had signed plenty of death warrants. "Clara," Thomas said, his voice cracking slightly. "I thought you were packing." "I am, Father," Clara said, her voice steady though her heart hammered. She did not like Silas Crowley. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at a lamb, not with malice. Exactly, but with an assumption of ownership. "Mr. Crowley, good day." Crowley tipped his hat, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long. "Miss Whitfield, a pity you are leaving us just as business gets interesting. Santa Fe will be cooler. I expect—" "I'm going to meet my fiancé," Clara said, lifting her chin. The word felt strange in her mouth. Fiancé? Lieutenant Edward Hale. She had met him only twice. He was a career military man, chosen by her father and her late mother's connections. A safe man, a protector. He commanded a unit near Santa Fe. He was the solution to the debt, the solution to her safety, the solution to everything. "Ah, yes, the good lieutenant," Crowley said, a smirk touching his lips. "A fine soldier. He understands the necessity of order. Tell your father, Miss Whitfield, that order is coming to this valley, whether he signs the deed or not." Crowley turned back to Thomas. "You have 1 week. Thomas, after that, I cannot guarantee the safety of your livestock or your water supply. Accidents happen in the West. It is a lawless place, with that veiled threat hanging in the stagnant air." Crowley walked out. The sound of his boots on the floorboard sounded like gunshots. Thomas sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Clara went to him, kneeling beside the worn leather armrest. "Papa," she whispered, we could go back east." "No," Thomas said, looking up with watery eyes. "There is nothing for me back east but ghosts, and I will not let a man like Crowley steal what I built. You go to Edward, marry him. He is a strong man. Once you are the wife of an officer, you will be safe. That is all that matters to me." Clara nodded, but a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She was being shipped off like a crate of cattle to a man she barely knew, to escape a man she despised, in a land she did not understand. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and bleeding orange, when Cade Nantan reined his horse to a halt near the rim of Echo Canyon. He was miles from the fort, miles from the railroad, deep in the broken lands where the shadows stretched long and sharp. He had spotted tracks, shod horses, 4 of them. Apache horses were rarely shod. These were white men's horses, but they were riding deep into territory that was supposed to be off-limits by the latest treaty, a treaty Cade knew was worth less than the paper it was written on. He dismounted, moving silently in his moccasins. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of tobacco and sweat. He crept to the edge of the limestone bluff and looked down. Below him, near a small, drying waterhole, was a small encampment. It was a family of Apaches, an old man, 2 women, and a child. They were skinning a rabbit, their movements slow and peaceful. They were friendlies, people who had not gone to the reservation but had tried to live quietly on the fringes. Then, from the opposite brush, the gunfire erupted. It was not a battle, it was an execution. Cade flinched as the cracks of Winchester rifles echoed off the canyon walls. He saw the old man fall backward, chest shattered. He saw the women scream and run, only to be cut down by laughing men who emerged from the rocks. The child, a boy of no more than 7, froze. Cade's hand went to his own rifle. His knuckles turned white. Every instinct in his blood screamed at him to fire, to drop the murderers where they stood. He had the high ground. He could kill all 4 of them before they knew he was there. But he froze. He saw the men clearly now. They were not soldiers. They were mercenaries, rough men in dusters. He recognized one, a man with a jagged scar on his cheek, who worked security for the Silver Star Rail. Crowley's men. One of the mercenaries walked up to the bodies. He did not check for life. Instead, he reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a bundle. Arrows, Apache arrows. The man walked to the rocks above the bodies and wedged the arrows into the crevices, breaking 2 of them to look like a missed volley. Then he took a knife and slashed the throat of one of the dead women, a gruesome, ritualistic mark that some renegade bands used, but which this peaceful family would never have invited. "That'll do it," the scarred man shouted, his voice carrying up to Cade. "Looks like a renegade raiding party. The colonel will have to clear the whole sector now." Cade lowered his rifle, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. If he shot them now, he would be a lone Apache killing white employees of the railroad. The narrative would be spun instantly. Apache scout goes rogue, massacre survey team. The army would retaliate by burning the reservation. Hundreds would die for the 4 men he killed. He had to swallow the bile rising in his throat. He had to let his heart turn to stone. Again, he watched as the men mounted up and rode south, leaving the bodies for the buzzards. Only when they were long gone did Cade descend. He had no shovel. He covered the bodies with heavy stones to keep the coyotes away, chanting a silent prayer that felt hollow in his mouth. He followed the mercenaries. He had to know the end game. Night fell, cold and absolute. Cade tracked them to a bivouac near the main pass that led to Santa Fe. He left his horse tethered a mile back and crawled through the sagebrush until he was close enough to hear the crackle of their campfire and the murmur of their voices. Silas Crowley was there. He had ridden out to meet them. "Is it done?" Crowley asked, lighting a cigar with a burning twig. "Done and dusted, boss," the scarred mercenary said. "Left enough arrows to start a war, but are you sure about tomorrow the army might get skittish?" "That is the point," Crowley said, smoke curling around his face. "The army is hesitant to clear the sacred springs because of the treaty, but if there is an attack on a civilian transport, well, public outcry changes policy." "Which transport?" "The noon stagecoach to Santa Fe," Crowley said calmly. "It carries the payroll, which you boys can keep, but more importantly, it carries Thomas Whitfield's daughter. We don't hurt her, not badly. We scare her. We shoot the driver, overturn the coach, make it look like a war party pinned them down. I want her to go crying to her fiancé. Lieutenant Hale. Hale will fly into a rage and demand General Crook wipe every Apache out of these canyons. Once the Apaches are gone or dead, the water rights belong to Silver Star." Cade lay in the dirt, his body rigid. They were going to attack a stagecoach. They were going to use a white girl as bait to start a war that would end his people. He backed away slowly, inch by inch, until he was safe in the darkness. Then he ran. He ran to his horse with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. He could not go to the army. They would not believe an Apache over a railroad tycoon. He could not go to his tribe. They would kill him for wearing the blue coat. He was alone, and the noon stage was leaving in 12 hours. The morning sun was deceptively gentle as Clara Whitfield adjusted her hat. It was a traveling ensemble of gray wool, sensible and sturdy, though she felt anything but sensible. Her trunks were strapped to the back of the Concord stagecoach. 6 horses stamped and snorted in the harness. Sensing the long haul ahead, the driver, a weathered man named Old Pete, who chewed tobacco like it was food, checked the reins. "Ready, Miss Clara," Pete called down. "Got a shotgun rider today. Young fella from Texas. We'll get you to Santa Fe in 2 days, barring high water." "I'm ready, Pete," Clara said. She turned to her father. Thomas looked pale. He gripped her hands tightly. "You be a good wife to Edward," Thomas said, his voice thick. "He will take care of you. Forget about this ranch. Forget about the debts. Just live safely. I will write to you the moment I arrive," Clara promised. She kissed his cheek, smelling the scent of old leather and worry. She climbed into the coach. The interior was cramped and smelled of dust and old velvet. There was one other passenger, a quiet man in a bowler hat who clutched a briefcase to his chest, likely a banker or a clerk. "Yeah," Pete cracked the whip. The coach lurched forward. Clara leaned out the window, waving to her father until he was just a speck against the vast, indifferent brown of the landscape. As the town of Silver Creek faded behind them, the vastness of the west swallowed them whole. To her left rose the red walls of the canyons, majestic and terrifying. To her right, the endless stretch of sagebrush, She felt a thrill of excitement mixed with her fear. She was traveling through the wild. She did not know that high above, in the rocks, eyes were watching. She did not know that miles ahead, men were painting their faces with mud to look like the monsters she feared. And she did not know that a single rider, a man with a heart he claimed was stone, was racing across the desert floor, cutting through the treacherous shortcuts of the Badlands, racing time itself to intercept her destiny. Clara settled back against the seat, smoothing her gloves. She looked out at the passing cactus, innocent of the blood that had been spilled yesterday, and the blood that would be spilled today. She thought of Edward Hale, hoping he would be kind. She thought of the Apache, hoping they would stay in the pages of her books. The stagecoach wheels thundered a rhythm on the hard-packed road. Safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe. The parallel lines were beginning to bend. The collision was inevitable. The innocent girl and the stone-hearted warrior were hurtling toward a moment that would shatter the world they both thought they understood. 19 years, she whispered to herself, closing her eyes. Let me just get through today. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the slot canyons, sounding suspiciously like a warning that came too late. The road through the canyon was a scar of pale dust cutting through walls of red sandstone that rose 500 feet into the burning sky. It was a place of shadows and echoes, where the wind sounded like a dying breath, and the silence felt heavy, as if the rocks themselves were holding their breath. Clara Whitfield sat inside the swaying stagecoach, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The heat inside the cabin was stifling, smelling of old leather and the sweat of the man in the bowler hat sitting across from her. He had introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy, a clerk for the mining company, but he had fallen asleep 10 miles back, his head lolling with every jolt of the wheels. Clara tried to focus on the book in her lap, a novel about polite society in England, but the words swam before her eyes. Her mind was on the ominous shape of the cliffs outside. Her father had warned her about this pass. He called it the Devil's Throat. Suddenly, the world exploded. There was no warning. One moment, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of hooves. The next, a thunderclap of gunfire shattered the air. The stagecoach lurched violently to the left as the lead horse screamed a high, terrible sound that made Clara's blood freeze. "Get down!" old Pete shouted from the driver's box, his voice strangled by panic. Another volley of shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls so that they seemed to come from everywhere at once. The window next to Mr. Abernathy shattered, spraying glass across the interior. The clerk jerked violently, a bloom of red expanding on his white shirt, and then he slumped forward, sliding off the seat to the floorboards. Clara screamed, but the sound was lost in the chaos. The coach hit a rock, tilted precariously on 2 wheels, and then crashed onto its side with a bone-jarring impact that threw Clara against the ceiling, which was now the wall. Dust choked the air. For a moment, there was a ringing silence in Clara's ears, followed by the groans of the dying horses and the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel. Clara lay amidst the wreckage, her shoulder throbbing. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through her shock. She knew she had to hide. She scrambled backward, pushing herself into the small space behind a crate of mining supplies that had been wedged under the seat. She pulled her gray skirts in tight, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Voices drifted in through the broken window frame. Rough, American voices. "Did you get the driver?" "Yeah, took him right in the chest. Old fool never cleared leather." "Good. Make it look messy. The boss wants a spectacle." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She peered through a crack in the splintered wood. Through the haze of dust, she saw 3 men. They wore linen dusters and hats pulled low, and their faces were covered with bandanas. But as one of them turned, the wind caught his coat, revealing a heavy revolver and a belt knife, civilized weapons. However, what the man held in his hand made no sense. He was holding a bundle of arrows. "Stick them everywhere," the leader growled. He was a big man with a voice like grinding stones. "Put 2 in the driver and 1 in the clerk. Make sure they are deep. Crowley said he wants the army to have no doubts who did this. Crowley. The name hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. Silas Crowley. The man who had stood in her father's living room only yesterday. "Hey, look at this," one of the men said, kicking the side of the coach. "Dressed it up real nice. The girl must be inside. Is she dead?" "Doesn't matter if she is or isn't," the leader said, pulling a knife from his belt. "If she is alive, we will finish it. Cut her hair off. We need a scalp to really sell the story. Leave plenty of Apache signs." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. They were going to kill her. They were going to kill her and blame it on the Apaches to help Crowley steal the land. The injustice of it burned almost as hot as the terror. The man with the knife stepped toward the overturned carriage. "Come out, little lady," he taunted. "Don't make me come in there." Crack. The sound was singular and precise, different from the chaotic gunfire earlier. It was the sharp report of a long-range rifle. The man who had been stepping toward the coach jerked as if pulled by an invisible string. A red blossom appeared on his chest, and he collapsed backward into the dust without a sound. "Sniper!" the leader screamed, diving behind a boulder. "Up on the ridge." 2 more shots rang out in rapid succession. One struck the ground inches from the second man's boot, sending up a spray of rock shards. The other hit the wheel of the coach, singing through the spokes. "I can't see him," the second man yelled, firing his pistol blindly toward the cliffs. "He is too high up. It's a ghost." "It's an Apache," the leader roared. "I saw the flash. We are sitting ducks here." The panic in their voices was sudden and absolute. These were men who killed for money, bullies who preyed on the weak. Faced with an unseen lethal marksman who held the high ground, their courage evaporated. "Pull out," the leader shouted. "Leave the girl, just get the hell out of here." They scrambled for their horses, mounting in a chaotic frenzy. Within seconds, the sound of their galloping hooves faded down the canyon, leaving only the settling dust and the smell of blood. Clara waited for a long time, trembling uncontrollably. Was it over? Has the army arrived? She pushed the crate aside and crawled toward the opening of the coach. Her hands were cut by glass, her dress torn. She dragged herself out into the blinding sunlight and fell to her knees in the dirt. The scene was a nightmare. Old Pete hung limp over the side of the driver's box, 2 arrows protruding from his back arrows that had been planted after he was dead. Mr. Abernathy lay in the dirt where he had fallen, and standing in the middle of the carnage was a monster. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and terrifying. He wore buckskin trousers and a blue army jacket with the sleeves ripped off. His skin was bronze, his hair black and long, tied back with a strip of cloth. In his hands, he held a Winchester rifle. It was the Apache. Clara's mind, already fractured by trauma, snapped to the only conclusion her upbringing allowed. The men had said they were planting signs. They had said Apaches were savages. And here he was, standing over the dead, a weapon in his hand, looking down at her with eyes as hard and cold as obsidian. He had killed the bandits to claim the prize for himself. She scrambled backward, her boots scraping in the gravel. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Stay away." Cade Nantan looked down at the white girl. She was a mess of dust and terror, her gray eyes wide with the kind of fear a rabbit shows the hawk. He saw the way she looked at him not with gratitude for saving her life, but with the assumption that he was the devil to come to collect. He stepped toward her. He needed to check if she was wounded. "Get back!" Clara screamed. She grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at him. It struck his shin, but he barely flinched. "You are foolish," Cade said. His voice was deep, rough like gravel tumbling in a stream. His English was accented but clear. "I am not going to hurt you." "Liar!" Clara sobbed, scrambling to her feet, looking for a weapon, looking for a way out. "You killed them. You killed Pete." Cade's jaw tightened. He did not have time for this. He tilted his head, listening. The wind carried a sound, a low rumble, rhythmic and growing louder. Hoofbeats, many of them, shod horses. He looked down the canyon. A cloud of dust was rising about a mile away. The cavalry. "Damn it," Cade cursed softly. If the soldiers found him here, standing amidst dead white men and a hysterical white woman, with Apache arrows sticking out of the corpses, They would not ask questions. They would hang him from the nearest cottonwood tree. And they would use this massacre as the excuse they needed to wipe out Lobo's village. He looked at the girl. If he left her, she would tell them she saw an Apache standing over the bodies. She would confirm Crowley's lie without even knowing it. She was the witness. And in her ignorance, she was the most dangerous weapon Crowley possessed. He had to take her. Cade slung his rifle over his shoulder and lunged. Clara shrieked as he closed the distance with terrifying speed. She swung her fist, striking his chest, but it was like hitting a wall of iron. He grabbed her wrist, spinning her around, and clamped a large, calloused hand over her mouth. "Be silent," he hissed in her ear. Clara fought with the desperation of the dying. She kicked backward, her heel connecting with his shin. She sank her teeth into the meat of his hand. Cade grunted in pain but did not let go. He wrapped his other arm around her waist, lifting her off her feet as if she weighed nothing. He dragged her away from the wreckage, toward a fissure in the canyon wall, a narrow crack hidden by scrub oak and shadow. He threw her into the darkness of the crevice and pinned her against the stone wall with his body. The rock was cool against her back, but his chest was hot and hard against hers. He kept his hand over her mouth, his eyes boring into hers. "If you make a sound," he whispered, his face inches from hers, "we both die. Do you understand?" Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with panic. She could taste the salt of his skin and the copper tang of blood on her lip. She did not nod. She just trembled. Outside, the thunder of hooves grew deafening. The cavalry troop slowed and halted at the crash site. "Dear God!" a voice shouted. It was a commanding voice, sharp and angry. Clara recognized it instantly. Edward. Lieutenant Edward Hale. "Edward!" She tried to scream against the hand, but the sound was smothered, coming out only as a muffled whimper. Cade pressed harder, his grip unyielding. He watched the scene through the screen of leaves. Edward Hale sat on a white horse, looking down at the bodies. He was a handsome man in a polished uniform, but his face was twisted in a snarl of disgust. "Apaches," Hale spat. "Look at the arrows. Filthy animals." "Sir," a sergeant called out. "The girl, Miss Whitfield. She is not here. There is blood. But nobody." Hale's face darkened. "They took her. Those godless savages took her. Probably dragged her off to their holes to do things a Christian man cannot speak of." Clara's heart hammered. "No. Edward. I am here. He is holding me. Save me," Sergeant Hale barked. "Send a rider to the telegraph office. Tell them the Apaches have broken the treaty. Tell them they have massacred civilians and abducted a white woman. I want permission to burn every village from here to the border." "Yes, sir. The rest of you, fan out," Hale ordered. "They cannot have gone far. If you see a savage, shoot to kill. Do not hesitate." The soldiers began to circle the wreckage. One rode close to the fissure where Cade and Clara were hidden. The horse whinnied, smelling something. Cade went perfectly still. He stopped breathing. He seemed to merge with the stone. His eyes did not leave the soldier. His free hand slowly moved to the knife at his belt. Clara felt the shift. She saw the knife. A new terror seized her. If the soldier saw them, this savage would kill the soldier, or the soldier would shoot, and she would be caught in the crossfire. The soldier paused, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, and turned his horse away. "Nothing over here. Lieutenant, the ground is too hard for tracks." "Move out," Hale commanded. "We will ride to the fort and gather the regiment. We are going to war." The troops spurred their horses and galloped away, the noise fading until the canyon returned to its oppressive silence. Only then did Cade exhale. He waited another full minute, ensuring no stragglers remained, before he slowly removed his hand from Clara's mouth. Clara immediately shoved him away. Gasping for air, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, her fear had transmuted into a blinding rage. "You animal!" she hissed, her voice shaking. "That was the army. That was my fiancé. Why did you not let me call out?" Cade stepped back, checking the bite mark on his hand. It was bleeding. He looked at her with a detached, cold assessment. Because if you had called out, Cade said flatly, your fiancé would have shot me dead, and then he would have used your kidnapping as an excuse to slaughter my family. You kidnapped me, Clara shouted, pointing a trembling finger at him. You attacked the coach. I saw the arrows. I saw you standing there. You saw what you wanted to see. Cade snapped. The stone in his chest felt heavy. I did not attack your coach. White men did. Hired guns. I killed 2 of them to save your miserable life. Liar, Clara screamed. Why would white men kill white men? Why were there arrows? To make it look like this. Cade gestured to the carnage. To make your Lieutenant Hale do exactly what he just did, declare war. It is a frame-up, and you fell for it, just like they knew you would. Clara stared at him. The logic was twisted. Impossible. White men killing their own. To start a war, it went against everything she knew. I am leaving, she said, lifting her chin, trying to summon the dignity of a Whitfield. I am going to walk down that road until I reach Silver Creek, and when I do, I will tell them everything. She turned to walk away. Cade moved faster than a striking snake. He grabbed her arm and spun her back. You are going nowhere, he said. Let me go. Think, girl. Cade shook her once. Hard. Those men who attacked you, they ran because I shot them. But they will come back. They have to. They need to retrieve the arrows, hide the bodies, and make sure there are no loose ends. If you are walking on the road, they will find you, and they will put a bullet in your head to keep you quiet. Clara froze. The memory of the voice from behind the crate returned to her. Doesn't matter if she is alive or dead. We finished it. Then, take me to the fort, she whispered, her defiance crumbling. Take me to Edward. I cannot, Cade said. I am a scout who has just gone rogue. If I ride up to the fort with you, they will hang me before I can say a word. And you are too stupid to understand what you saw. You will tell them I did it, and the result will be the same. War. He looked at the sun. Time was running out. There is only one way you survive this, Cade said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. And only one way my people survive. You are coming with me. No, Clara breathed, backing away until she hit the rock wall. I won't go with you. You are a savage. Cade pulled a length of rawhide rope from his belt. His face was a mask of grim determination. I am whatever I need to be, he said. He stepped forward. Clara tried to hit him again, but he caught her wrists easily. He spun her around and bound her hands behind her back. He did not tie them painfully tight. There was a strange, reluctant gentleness in his efficiency. But the knots were secure. This is kidnapping, Clara sobbed, tears finally spilling over. Please, my father will pay you anything you want. Your father has no money, Cade said, hoisting her up. And I do not want gold. He led her out of the crevice, whistling a sharp, low note. His paint horse trotted out from behind a cluster of boulders where it had been waiting. Cade lifted Clara by the waist and placed her onto the saddle. She sat sideways, her hands bound, feeling utterly helpless. He swung up behind her, his chest pressing against her back, his arms caging her in as he took the reins. Where are you taking me? She asked, her voice small and broken. Cade turned the horse's head away from the road, toward the deep, jagged wilderness of the Dragoon Mountains. To the only place the army cannot find us, Cade said. To the stronghold. If you want to live, Clara Whitfield, you had better learn to ride. He kicked the horse into a gallop. Clara gasped as they surged forward, leaving the road and the dead bodies behind. She was a prisoner now, a captive of the very thing she feared most. But as the wind whipped her hair and the heat of the warrior's body seeped into her cold skin, a confusing, terrifying thought took root in her mind. He had shot the men who wanted to kill her. He had stopped her from screaming when the soldiers would have started a shooting match. He was kidnapping her. Yes, but he was riding away from the people who wanted her dead. They rode into the vast, red silence of the desert. 2 enemies, bound together by a lie and a rope, heading into the heart of the stone. The inciting incident was complete. The bridge to her old life was burned. Now, There was only the wilderness. The desert did not care if Clara Whitfield was innocent. It did not care that she was the daughter of a rancher, or that she had been wearing fine gray wool intended for a parlor in Santa Fe. The desert only knew thirst, and it demanded payment in moisture. They had been riding for hours, heading deeper into a landscape that looked less like Earth and more like the surface of a dying star. The red rocks of the canyon had given way to an endless, undulating ocean of sagebrush and mesquite, broken only by jagged spires of basalt that stabbed at the white-hot sky. Clara sat behind Cade, her hands still bound loosely at the wrists. Her thighs burned from the friction of the saddle, and her throat felt as though she had swallowed a handful of razor blades. She had lost her hat miles back, and the sun was a physical weight on her head, pounding against her temples with a rhythmic thud that matched the horse's gait. She swayed, her vision tunneling. The broad back of the Apache warrior in front of her was the only solid thing in a spinning world. She tried to grip his waist, but her fingers were numb. The horse stumbled slightly over a loose rock. It was a small motion, but for Clara, it was enough. She slid sideways. Gravity took hold, and she tumbled from the animal's rump, hitting the hard-packed earth with a bone-jarring thud. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She lay in the dust, gasping, staring up at the blinding sun. The horse stopped instantly. Cade did not shout. He simply dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stood over her, blocking out the sun. To Clara, in her delirious state, he looked like a judgment from God, tall, dark, and terrifying. "Get up," Cade said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the authority of stone. "I cannot," Clara rasped. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. "Leave me. Just leave me here." Cade looked down at her. He saw the blistering sunburn on her cheeks, the way her chest heaved with shallow, desperate breaths. He felt a flicker of annoyance, but beneath it, something else, a heavy, unwelcome weight of responsibility. If she died, the truth died with her. He reached for the canteen hanging from his saddle horn. He uncorked it and knelt beside her. "Drink," he commanded. He lifted her head with one hand. His grip was firm, almost rough, but he tipped the canteen slowly. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but to Clara, it was sweet nectar. She choked, coughing as she drank too fast. "Slowly," Cade scolded. He pulled the canteen away. "If you drink too fast, you will vomit. And I do not have water to waste on vomit." He sat back on his heels, studying her. Her face was turning a dangerous shade of crimson. She was a creature of shade and verandas, not built for this cauldron. Reluctantly, Cade reached up and untied the red cotton scarf he wore around his neck. It was stained with sweat and dust, but it was thick. "Turn around," he said. Clara flinched. "What are you going to do?" "Do not ask questions. Turn around," she obeyed, trembling. Cade draped the scarf over her head, pulling it forward to shadow her face, and tied the ends loosely under her chin. He adjusted it so it covered the back of her neck, the place where the sun struck hardest. "Keep it on," he said. "The sun is a slow knife. It kills you before you know you are bleeding." He stood up and offered her a hand. Clara stared at it. It was a large hand, calloused and brown, the hand of a man who was killed, but it was also the hand that had just given her water. She took it. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength and hoisted her back onto the horse. "Hold on to me," Cade said as he mounted. "If you fall again, I might not stop." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against the rough blue wool of his jacket. She hated him. She feared him. But in this vast, oven-like hell, he was the only thing keeping her alive. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and absolute. The heat vanished, replaced by a biting cold that seeped into the bones. They camped in a shallow depression near a dry wash, sheltered by a cluster of boulders. Cade built a small fire, expertly arranging twigs of greasewood to create heat with minimal smoke. The flame was no bigger than a man's hand, but it was mesmerizing. He untied Clara's wrists. She rubbed the red marks on her skin, watching him warily. She expected the worst. She had read the dime novels. She knew what savages did to white women in the dark. Cade tossed a piece of dried meat at her. It landed on her skirt. "Eat," he said. Clara picked it up. It was as hard as shoe leather. She gnawed on it, her eyes never leaving him. Cade ignored her. He sat on the opposite side of the fire, checking his rifle. He wiped the dust from the mechanism with a reverence he did not show for anything else. Then, he took off his heavy scout jacket, rolled it up, and placed it against a rock. He lay down. Turning his back to her, Clara froze. He was going to sleep just like that. "Are you—" she started, her voice shaking. "Are you going to tie me up?" Cade did not turn around. "If you run, you will freeze or the coyotes will eat you. If you stay, you live. Make your choice." Clara huddled into the thin blanket he had given her. She watched the rise and fall of his breathing. He lay 10 feet away. He had not touched her. He had not looked at her with lust. He had not threatened her with anything other than the harsh reality of their situation. This did not fit the story. The monster was supposed to be monstrous. She looked at the fire, then at the vast, star-dusted sky above. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant yip of a coyote. "Why?" she whispered to the darkness. "Why did you save me?" Cade's voice drifted back, low and tired. "Go to sleep, white girl. Tomorrow is harder than today." Clara lay awake for a long time, clutching a stone in her hand, waiting for an attack that never came. The next day brought the wind. It started as a whisper, stirring the dust around the horse's hooves. By mid-morning, it was a moan. By noon, the horizon had disappeared, swallowed by a wall of brown that stretched from the earth to the heavens. "Haboob," Cade muttered. He kicked the horse into a trot, his eyes scanning the landscape with urgency. "What is it?" Clara shouted over the rising gale. "Dust storm," Cade yelled back. "We need cover, now." The sky turned a sickly orange. The sun became a dim copper coin. The wind began to scream, hurling sand with the force of buckshot. It stung Clara's face through the scarf. The horse whinnied in panic, fighting the bit. Cade spotted a fissure in a sandstone wall, a narrow, vertical crack barely wide enough for a man. He leapt off the horse, dragged Clara down, and slapped the horse's flank. "Go!" he shouted to the animal. The horse bolted, finding its own shelter in a box canyon nearby. Cade grabbed Clara and shoved her into the fissure. It was a tight fit. The rock walls pressed in on both sides. He pushed her all the way to the back, then squeezed in front of her, using his broad body as a shield against the opening. The storm hit with the force of a locomotive. The world outside vanished in a howling brown chaos. Sand blasted against Cade's back, filling the air with a choking powder. In the cramped darkness of the crevice, they were pressed together. Clara could feel the heat radiating from him. Her face was pressed against his chest. She could smell the scent of him old leather, sage, sweat, and something elemental, like rain on hot stone. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. It was terrifying and intimate. She had never been this close to a man, not even her father, and certainly not to Edward Hale. Cade stood rigid, his arms braced against the rock walls on either side of her head, creating a cage of protection. He looked down. In the dim light, he could see her eyes, wide and luminous with fear. He felt a strange tightening in his chest. He told himself it was just the adrenaline. He told himself she was just a package he had to deliver, but he could feel her trembling against him. For the first time in years, the stone in his heart felt a hairline fracture. "Breathe," he said softly, his voice a rumble in his chest that she felt more than heard. "It will pass." Clara looked up at him. His face was inches from hers. She saw the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the depth of his dark eyes. He was not looking at her like a predator. He was looking at her like a man protecting something fragile. "Why do they hate you?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "The people in town, Edward. Why do they say you are animals?" Cade looked away, staring into the swirling dust outside. "Because it is easier to kill an animal than a man. If we are animals, they do not have to feel guilty about taking the land." The storm raged for an hour. When the wind finally died down and the air cleared, Cade stepped out first. He shook himself like a dog, dust cascading from his hair and clothes. He unbuttoned his shirt and pulled it off to shake the sand out of the fabric. Clara stepped out of the fissure, blinking in the returning light. She looked at him, and her breath caught in her throat. Cade's back was a map of violence. Thick, ropey scars crisscrossed his bronze skin. Some were old and white, others were pink and jagged. They were the marks of a whip. A lot of lashes, more than any man should survive. Cade turned and saw her staring. He did not cover himself immediately. He saw the horror in her eyes. "You look surprised," he said flatly. "Who did that to you?" Clara whispered. Did your people do that a punishment?" Cade laughed, a short, bitter bark of a sound. "My people do not use whips. Whips are a civilized invention." He pulled his shirt back on, buttoning it slowly. "These were gifts from the United States Army, 3 years ago. I refused to lead a patrol to a village where my sister lived. They called it insubordination. They gave me 50 lashes to teach me obedience." Clara felt a wave of nausea. 50 lashes. The army. Edward's army. "But Edward said the army is here to protect," she stammered, her worldview tilting on its axis. "They protect their own," Cade said, grabbing his rifle. "Come. We have miles to walk before we find the horse." They found the horse 3 miles down the wash, calm and unhurt. But the delay had cost them. The sun was setting again when they reached a place Cade called Coyote Springs. It was a small oasis, a trickle of water seeping from the rocks into a shallow pool surrounded by bees and thorny brush. Clara was so thirsty she rushed forward. She scrambled down the rocky bank, desperate to wash the dust from her face. "Wait," Cade warned, but it was too late. Clara stepped on a loose stone, her ankle twisted with a sickening pop, and she fell hard into a patch of thorny mesquite. She cried out, rolling onto her back. Pain shot up her leg, hot and sharp. "Stupid," Cade muttered, but he was already moving. He slid down the bank and knelt beside her. "Let me see," he said. "It hurts." Clara gasped, tears squeezing from her eyes. Cade ignored her tears. He reached for her boot. "I have to take this off. It will swell." He unlaced the boot with surprising dexterity. When he pulled it off, Clara groaned. Her ankle was already puffing up, blue and angry. To make matters worse, the thorns had scratched her calf, and red ants were swarming near her foot. Cade swore softly in Apache. He lifted her and carried her away from the ants, setting her down on a flat rock near the water. He disappeared into the brush for a moment and returned with a handful of green leaves. He placed them on a flat stone and used the butt of his knife to crush them into a paste. The smell was pungent and medicinal. "This is a creosote bush," he explained. "It stops the swelling and the pain." He took her foot in his hand. Clara tensed. It was the first time a man had touched her bare ankle. In Boston, this would be a scandal. Here, it was medicine. Cade applied the green paste gently. His fingers were rough, but his touch was incredibly light. He massaged the area around the bone, his thumb working out the tension. Clara watched him. His head was bent, his black hair falling forward. He was focused, careful. This was the same man who had shot 2 bandits dead yesterday. The duality of it confused her. "Why?" she asked again. "Why are you helping me? You could have left me at the wreckage. You could have left me in the storm." Cade finished wrapping her ankle with a strip of cloth from his saddlebag. He sat back, wiping his hands on his trousers. The moon was rising, casting a silver light over the desert. It reflected in his dark eyes. "Because Silas Crowley wants a war," Cade said, "and he is using you to get it." "Crowley," Clara frowned. "He is a businessman. A terrible one, but a businessman." "He is a thief," Cade said. "He wants the water in Echo Canyon. But my uncle's village is there. The treaty protects it. So Crowley hired those men to attack your coach. He hired them to kill you and plant those arrows." Clara shook her head. "No, that is monstrous. Edward would never allow that. Your Lieutenant Hale is a fool, Cade said with disdain. Or he is blind. Crowley plays him like a fiddle. The arrows were fake. Clara, the feathers were fletched with turkey. Not hawk. The markings were wrong. Any Apache would know it, but to a white soldier an arrow is an arrow. He looked directly at her. I was in the rocks. I heard them talking before the attack. They said, make it look like Apaches. Crowley will pay extra. Clara fell silent. She remembered the voice she had heard from behind the crate. Crowley will like this. She looked at her ankle, wrapped in the green paste. She looked at the man sitting across from her. A man scarred by the very people she trusted. A man who had saved her life 3 times in 2 days. A crack appeared in the wall of her conviction. It was a terrifying fissure. If Cade was telling the truth, then her father was in danger. Edward was being used, and she was the only one who knew. If I believe you, Clara whispered. What can we do? Nobody will listen to an Apache. Cade stood up, his silhouette stark against the stars. That is why you are here, he said. They will not listen to me. But if you survive, if you stand before them and tell them that white men attacked you, not Apaches, then maybe the guns will stay silent? He turned to her. I am not keeping you as a prisoner. Clara, I am keeping you as a witness. But first, I have to keep you alive. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion in his shoulders. She saw the burden he carried, a man hated by both sides, trying to stop a war that everyone else seemed to want. The fear in her chest began to recede, replaced by a strange, new feeling. Respect. Thank you, she said softly. For the ankle. Cade nodded once, curtly, and turned back to the darkness. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow we will reach the stronghold. Then you will see what your people call savages. Clara lay back on the stone. The pain in her ankle was dulling, replaced by the cool tingle of the medicine. She watched Cade standing guard, a silent sentinel in the night. The desert was vast and cruel, but for the first time since the ambush, she did not feel alone. The stone heart was there, but she had felt its heat, and she knew now that it could bleed. The stronghold was not a fortress of stone walls and iron gates, as Clara had imagined. It was a pocket of life hidden within the chest of the mountain, a verdant slash of green tucked away behind a labyrinth of canyons that would break the legs of any horse not born to the rock. Cade guided their weary mount through a narrow fissure, the stone walls so close they brushed Clara's knees. Then, the world opened up. Below them lay a valley floor lush with cottonwood and willow, fed by a spring that bubbled up from the deep earth. Smoke curled lazily from the tops of Wickiup's dome-shaped dwellings made of brush and canvas. Children ran through the tall grass, their laughter rising like bird calls. Women sat in circles, weaving baskets or grinding corn on flat stones. It was a scene of such profound domesticity that Clara felt the breath leave her lungs. She had expected a war camp. She had expected drums, war paint, and captives tied to stakes. Instead, she saw a community. This is the stronghold, Cade said, his voice devoid of the sharp edge it usually carried. My uncle's home. As they descended the trail, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter died. The women stopped their work. Dark eyes turned toward them, hard and unblinking. The arrival of a blue-coated scout was bad enough. The arrival of a white woman was an omen. Cade halted the horse in the center of the village. He slid off and reached up to help Clara down. Her ankle was stiff, wrapped in the dirty cloth, but she managed to stand. A group of men approached. They were not wearing the uniform of the army. They wore buckskin and cloth, and they carried rifles that looked well used. One of them, a young warrior with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, stepped forward. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing violently at Clara. His tone was not welcoming. Cade replied calmly, his voice low and steady. He stood between Clara and the men, his body a barrier. The young warrior spat on the ground near Clara's boot and reached for the knife at his belt. Stop, a voice commanded from the largest Wickiup. An older man emerged. He moved with a stiffness that spoke of old wounds, but his presence was commanding. His hair was entirely white, framing a face that looked like it had been carved from the canyon wall itself. This was Lobo. "You bring a ghost to our fire." "Nephew," Lobo said in English, his gaze fixing on Clara. "I bring a witness, Uncle," Cade replied. "She was on the stagecoach. Crowley's men attacked it." They planted arrows. A murmur went through the crowd. The young warrior, whose name Clara would later learn was Victor, stepped forward again. "She is white. She will lead the soldiers here. Tie her up. We can trade her for rifles." "She is under my protection," Cade said, his hand resting casually near his revolver. "Anyone who touches her answers to me." Lobo looked at Clara. His eyes were deep and knowing, stripping away her defenses more effectively than any weapon. "Is this true? Girl, did you see the arrows?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, "Yes, men in dusters. They killed the driver and they put the arrows in him after he was dead." Lobo studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "She stays. But if she tries to leave, she dies. We cannot risk the path being revealed." The reprieve was fragile. For the next 2 days, Clara lived in a state of suspended terror. She was given a small shelter near the edge of the camp. The women ignored her. The children stared from a distance. She was an alien creature in a world she did not understand. But she watched. She saw mothers nursing babies. She saw old men teaching boys how to fletch arrows not for war, but for hunting rabbits. She saw a humanity that her father's newspapers had never mentioned. On the 3rd afternoon, the mood in the valley shattered. A scout rode in, his horse lathered in foam. He shouted a warning that sent the women scrambling to hide the children. Cade appeared at Clara's side instantly, grabbing her arm. "Come," he said. "You need to see this." He dragged her not toward the shelter, but up a steep, hidden trail that climbed the canyon wall. Clara struggled for breath, her ankle throbbing. But Cade did not slow down until they reached a high ledge overlooking the southern approach to the valley. Cade handed her a brass spyglass. "Look." Clara raised the heavy glass. Her hands trembled. She focused the lens on the dusty plain below the canyon entrance. A column of dust marked the arrival of riders. There were at least 50 of them, soldiers in blue uniforms. And at the front, riding a tall bay horse, was Silas Crowley. Next to him rode a man whose posture Clara knew as well as her own. The stiff, upright spine, the polished saber at his hip. "Edward," she breathed. Lieutenant Edward Hale looked every inch the hero she had been promised, but he was not charging into battle. He was riding stirrup to stirrup with the man who had threatened her father. Cade lay flat on the rock beside her. "Listen, the wind carries the sound." They were far away, but the canyon acoustics were strange. The voices drifted up, faint but distinguishable. "Cannot wait for authorization from Washington. Lieutenant," Crowley was saying. "The girl is gone. Dead, likely. These savages are hiding in there. We need to clear the route for the blasting crew." "I need proof." "Crowley." Edward's voice floated up, cold and detached. "I cannot order a bombardment on a hunch. If Clara is in there—" "If she is in there, she is already defiled," Crowley cut in. "Do you want her back after they have had her better to mourn a martyr than welcome back a ruin? Think of the railroad. Edward, think of your commission. We clear the canyon. We blame the renegades for the stagecoach, and you get your promotion." Clara lowered the spyglass. The world tilted. Better to mourn a martyr. Edward her safety. Her future was discussing her death as a convenient political tool. He was not looking for her to save her. He was looking for an excuse to open fire. He knows," Clara whispered, horror chilling her blood. "He knows Crowley is lying, and he does not care." "He cares about order," Cade said, taking the spyglass back. "And the railroad brings order. The Apache brings chaos. You are just collateral damage. Clara." They watched as Crowley's men set up a perimeter. They were not attacking yet. They were waiting, That night, the council fire burned hot in the center of the stronghold. The atmosphere was thick with fear and anger. Clara sat in the shadows, listening. Victor was shouting, arguing that they should attack the soldiers now. In the dark, others wanted to flee deeper into the mountains, abandoning their homes. "They have cannons," one elder argued. "If we stay, we die. If we run, we starve," Victor countered. "Give them the girl. Throw her body down the cliff. Maybe they will leave." Cade stood up. The firelight danced on his face, making his scars look like fresh wounds. "Giving them the girl changes nothing. Crowley does not want her. He wants the water. He wants the land." "How do you know?" Victor sneered. "You wear the white man's coat. Maybe you still work for them." Silence fell. All eyes turned to Cade. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Then Clara stood up. She stepped out of the shadows and into the circle of light. Her gray dress was torn and stained with red dust. Her face was sunburned, but she held her head high. "He does not work for them," Clara said clearly. The Apache warriors stared at her. A white woman speaking in the council was unheard of. "I am Clara Whitfield," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I was on the coach. The men who attacked us were white. They wore masks. I heard them speak. They said, 'Leave more Apache signs. Crowley will like this.'" She looked at Lobo, then at Victor. "They killed the driver. They tried to kill me. Cade saved me. He is the only reason I'm alive to tell you this. My fiancé, the man out there with the soldiers. He is listening to Crowley. They want to steal this valley for the train." She took a breath, fighting the tremble in her hands. "I am not your enemy. I am the proof you need. If I can get to a judge, or a general who isn't corrupt, I can testify. I can stop them." Lobo looked at her for a long time. "You would speak against your own kind, against the man you were to marry." "He is not my kind," Clara said, her voice hard. "Not anymore." A shift occurred in the circle. The hostility didn't vanish, but it changed texture. She was no longer just a white intruder. She was a weapon they might be able to use. The peace did not last the hour. A sudden, thunderous boom shook the ground. Rocks cascaded down the canyon wall near the eastern perimeter. Screams erupted. Crowley was sending a message. Not a full attack, but a stick of dynamite thrown to terrorize. Clara ran toward the source of the scream. A wickiup had collapsed. A young boy, no older than 7, was being pulled from the debris. His leg was bleeding badly from a jagged rock splinter. His mother was wailing, terrified. "Let me help." Clara pushed through the crowd. "I know how to clean a wound." The mother tried to push her away, but Cade was there. He caught the mother's wrist gently. "Let her," he said in Apache. Clara knelt in the dirt. She tore a strip from her petticoat, the clean white linen underneath the gray wool. She worked quickly, applying pressure, washing the grit away with water from a skin bag. She moved with an efficiency that surprised even herself. The lessons she had learned tending to livestock on the ranch came back to her. She looked up and saw Cade kneeling opposite her. He was holding the boy's shoulders, speaking softly to him, keeping him calm. His face was inches from the child's. The hard mask was gone. In its place was a tenderness that broke Clara's heart. He was not a stone man. He was a man who loved his people so fiercely it terrified him. When the bleeding stopped and the leg was bound, Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. She caught Cade watching her. There was no suspicion in his eyes now. There was only a quiet, intense recognition. "You have good hands," he said. "My father taught me," Clara replied softly. "He said you save what you can, when you can." But the violence had stirred the blood of the young warriors. Victor and 2 others approached them, their faces twisted with rage. "This is her fault," Victor shouted, pointing at Clara. "The blue coats are here because of her. We should kill her now and send her head to them." Victor lunged. He did not mean to capture. He meant to kill. He had a knife in his hand. Cade moved before Clara could even scream. He stepped in front of her, catching Victor's wrist in midair. The 2 men collided with the force of rams. They grappled, dust swirling around them. "Stop it," Clara screamed. Victor was younger, but Cade fought with the brutal efficiency of a man who had survived the army's prisons. He twisted Victor's arm, forcing him to drop the knife, and shoved him backward into the dirt. Cade stood over him, breathing hard. He did not draw his weapon. He simply stood there, a wall between the violence and the girl. "If you want to touch her," Cade snarled, his voice carrying across the silent camp, "you step over my dead body. She is not a prisoner. She is with me." Victor glared, humiliated, holding his bruised wrist. He spat on the ground and stormed off into the darkness. Cade turned to Clara. He did not ask if she was all right. He looked at her with a mix of fury and exhaustion, then turned and walked away toward his isolated shelter at the edge of the camp. An hour later, the rain began. It was a cold, high desert rain that smelled of sage and wet stone. Clara sat in her shelter, shivering, but the cold was not what bothered her. It was the memory of Cade's face when he fought Victor. He was bleeding. She had seen the dark stain spreading on the shoulder of his blue jacket. She could not stay here. She gathered her resolve, grabbed her small bag of makeshift bandages, and walked into the rain. Cade's wickiup was dark. She hesitated at the flap, then pushed it open. "Go away!" His voice came from the darkness. It was tight with pain. "No," Clara said. She stepped inside. A small fire was dying in the center pit. Cade was sitting on his bedroll, shirtless. He was trying to wash a long, shallow gash on his upper arm, a cut from Victor's knife that he had hidden from the others. He looked up. His eyes were defensive, guarding the vulnerability of his pain. "I told you to go," he said. "It is not proper for you to be here." "Proper?" Clara let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Crowley is bombing children. Edward is planning to murder me. I think we are past proper. Cade." She knelt beside him. "Let me see." He tried to pull away. "It is nothing. Just a scratch." "Stop being stone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just stop." She reached out and took the wet rag from his hand. He froze, his muscles tensing under her touch. She began to clean the wound. The silence in the small tent was heavy, filled with the sound of the rain drumming on the canvas. Clara looked at his chest. The scars she had seen before were there. Silver lines of old torture, but there were fresh bruises too. He was a map of suffering, enduring it all in silence. She looked down at herself. She was still wearing the ruined gray dress, stiff with dirt and sweat. It felt heavy. It felt like a lie. It was the costume of a girl who believed the world was safe and fair. That girl was dead. Slowly, Clara set the rag down. She stood up. Cade watched her, confused. "What are you doing?" Clara did not answer. Her hands went to the buttons of her bodice. Her fingers shook, but she forced them to work. She undid the high collar that choked her. She unbuttoned the cuffs. She pushed the heavy wool dress off her shoulders, letting it fall to the dirt floor in a heap. She stood there in her white cotton chemise and petticoat. She untied the scarf from her neck. She pulled the pins from her hair, letting the golden brown mass fall wet and heavy around her shoulders. She was shivering, but not from the cold. She was stripping away the Whitfield name, the expectations of Boston, the safety of being a lady. She was standing before him as simply a woman, flesh and blood, terrified and brave. "Clara," Cade breathed, his voice rough. He started to stand, to stop her, to cover her. "Do not—" She stepped closer. The firelight flickered over her pale skin, contrasting with his dark bronze. "You have let your heart turn to stone to survive." Clara whispered, "You think that if you feel nothing, they cannot hurt you, but you are wrong. You are bleeding, Cade, and not just from the knife." She reached out. She did not aim for his wound this time. She placed her hand flat against the center of his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating strong, rhythmic, frantic. Cade stopped breathing. He looked down at her hand, small and white against his skin. He looked into her eyes. They were wide, filled with tears, but holding a gaze that burned. "I am not a lady from the East anymore," she said. I am the woman you saved, and I am tired of the lies. I am tired of being afraid of you." She took a step closer, closing the distance between them. Her knees touched him. "The Apache's heart was stone," she whispered, quoting the line from the dime novel she had read on the train. The lie she had been fed. Then she looked up at him, her soul laid bare in her eyes. The innocent girl stripped bare and said, "Melt in my arms." It was a plea. It was a demand. It was an offer of sanctuary in the middle of a war. Stripped bare. Not for lust, though the air between them crackled with it, but for truth. She was offering him the only thing she had left, her trust, her complete, unguarded self. Cade stared at her. The conflict raged behind his eyes, the discipline of the scout versus the longing of the man. He knew he should push her away. He knew that loving her was a death sentence. But he could not move. Slowly, agonizingly. He raised his hands. He did not pull her into an embrace. Not yet. He took her hands, the ones resting on his chest. His grip was hard, desperate. He held them there, anchoring himself to her. "You are foolish," he rasped, his voice breaking. "You are dangerous." "I know," Clara whispered. Cade looked at her hair, damp and wild. He looked at the pulse beating in her throat. The stone in his chest groaned. It was not cracking. It was dissolving. "Do not love a man who lives between two lines," he said, the warning weak. But as he spoke, his thumbs traced the veins in her wrists. He pulled her hands tighter against his heart, as if trying to press her strength into his own body. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, surrendering to the heat of her. "Melt," Clara breathed against his skin. And in the silence of the tent, while the rain washed the world outside, the Apache warrior let out a long, shuddering breath, and the wall came down. The rumor spread through the territory faster than a prairie fire. A white woman, the daughter of a prominent rancher, was being held hostage in the dragon's throat. The story grew with every telling. By the time it reached the ears of the sprawling encampment at the canyon's mouth, Clara Whitfield was no longer a survivor. She was a martyr, a saint suffering unspeakable horrors at the hands of godless savages. This narrative was exactly what Silas Crowley required. From the high rim of the canyon, Cade looked down at the army that had assembled overnight. It was not a patrol this time. It was a siege force, 2 companies of cavalry, a battery of mountain howitzers, and dozens of hired guns riding under the banner of the Silver Star Rail. "They will shell the valley," Cade said, his voice flat. Beside him, Lobo watched the enemy. The old chief looked tired. "We must leave. The path to the high peaks is still open. We leave the land, but we save the blood." "No." Cade turned to his uncle. "If we run now, we will never stop running. Crowley does not just want the land. Uncle, he wants the water. If you leave the spring, the Apache spirit dries up with it." "Then we die fighting," Victor said, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. "We kill the girl first, throw her body down. Let them see we do not fear. You touch her, and you die." Cade snarled, his hand dropping to his Colt. "Stop it." Clara stepped into the center of the rocky outcrop. She looked different from the girl who had fainted in the desert. She wore a buckskin skirt given to her by one of the women. Her white chemise was stained with the red earth. Her hair was braided back, Apache style. She looked like she belonged to the stone. "There is another way," Clara said, her voice trembling but loud enough to be heard over the wind. "They are here because they think I am a prisoner. They think I am dead or worse. If I walk out there, if I stand before Edward and tell him the truth, the pretext for war disappears." "No," Cade said immediately. "Crowley will shoot you before you speak 10 words. "Crowley might," Clara argued, turning to face him. "But Edward is an officer of the United States Army. He follows the law. If I stand in front of 200 men and declare that Crowley is a liar, Edward cannot just order a massacre. There are witnesses. There is a chain of command. Edward Hale is a blind fool." Cade spat. "He will see what he wants to see. Then I will make him open his eyes," Clara insisted. She walked up to Cade. ignoring the stares of the other warriors. She placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You said I was a witness. Cade, let me testify." Cade looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had made her say "melt in my arms" only the night before. He wanted to lock her away in a cave and fight the whole world to keep her safe. But he knew she was right. It was the only desperate chance they had. "If you go down there," Cade said softly, "I will be on the ridge. My rifle will be trained on Crowley's heart. If he twitches so much as twitches, I kill him." "I know," Clara whispered. "I'm counting on it." That night, the valley was silent. The drums did not beat. The children did not cry. It was the silence of people waiting for the end of the world. Cade sat by the embers of a small fire, cleaning his Winchester. Clara sat opposite him. The intimacy of the previous night hung between them, heavy and unspoken. "I need to tell you," Cade said, not looking up from the gun oil and rag. "I need you to know who guards your back tomorrow." Clara waited. 10 years ago," Cade began, his voice rough as gravel. "I was young. I believed that if we learned the white man's ways, we could survive. I joined the army as a scout. I wore a blue coat. I learned English. I thought I was a bridge." He paused, sliding the bolt back into place with a metallic click. "There was a ravine near the Gila River. The army asked me to lead a parley. They said they wanted to talk peace with a band of Chiricahua. I rode in first. I told the chief, a man named Cochise, not the great one, a cousin, that the soldiers came with open hands." Cade finally looked up. His eyes were swimming with ancient ghosts. "I signaled the all clear. The soldiers rode in, but they did not have open hands. They had Gatling guns hidden in the wagons. They cut them down. Men, women, everyone. I stood there in my blue coat, screaming at the captain, but the noise of the guns drowned me out. When the smoke cleared, the captain tossed me a bag of silver coins. He said, 'Good work, scout.'" Clara covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "I threw the silver in the dust," Cade said. "But the blood never washes off. That is when my heart turned to stone. I vowed never to trust a white man again. I vowed never to trust myself again. I am a traitor to my people, Clara, and I am a tool to you." Clara moved around the fire. She knelt beside him and took his face in her hands. "You are not a tool," she said fiercely. "And you are not a traitor. You are the man who saved me from the storm. You are the man who stopped Victor from killing me. Tomorrow, you are not fighting for the army. You are not fighting for the past. You are fighting for the truth." Cade leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "If this goes wrong tomorrow, Clara, do not look back. Run to the river." "I am not running," Clara said. "We stand together, stone and innocent girl. Both are gone now. Just us." The morning sun crested the canyon wall, illuminating the valley floor like a stage. Down on the plain, the army was in formation. Rows of blue uniforms stood rigid. The brass cannons glinted in the light. Edward Hale sat on his horse, his face pale and drawn. Beside him, Silas Crowley smoked a cigar, looking bored. A third man, an older officer with gray whiskers and the insignia of a captain, sat nearby, looking through field glasses. This was Captain Marlowe, the regimental superior who had arrived with reinforcements. "We wait no longer," Crowley said, checking his pocket watch. "The sun is up. The savages have had their chance to surrender." "We give them 1 hour," Captain Marlowe said gruffly. "Regulations. Mr. Crowley." "My fiancée is suffering there," Edward snapped, his composure cracking. "Every minute we wait is another minute of torture for her." "Look!" a soldier shouted. A figure had emerged from the shadows of the canyon mouth. It was a woman. She walked slowly, holding a stick with a piece of white cloth tied to it. She was small against the towering red walls, a speck of gray and white against the immense landscape. "Is that—" Edward squinted. "Clara." "Hold your fire," Captain Marlowe bellowed. Clara walked steadily. Her legs shook, but she forced one foot in front of the other. She could see the line of rifles leveled at her. She could see Edward. She could see the predatory smirk on Crowley's face vanish, replaced by a scowl. She stopped 20 yards from the line of horses. "Clara," Edward dismounted and ran toward her. "Oh, God, you're alive!" He tried to embrace her, but Clara stepped back. The rejection was sharp and public. Edward froze. "Clara," he asked, confused. "It is me. You are safe now." "I was never unsafe. Edward," Clara said. Her voice was clear, carrying in the morning air. "Not until your army arrived. What are you saying?" Edward laughed nervously, looking back at the men. "The heat, the trauma. You are confused." "I am not confused," Clara said. She looked past him, directly at Silas Crowley. "I was not kidnapped by Apaches. The stagecoach was attacked by 4 white men in dusters. They killed Pete. They killed Mr. Abernathy. And they planted arrows in their bodies to trick you." A murmur rippled through the ranks of soldiers. Crowley spurred his horse forward. "The poor girl is hysterical," he shouted. "Stockholm Syndrome. The savages have brainwashed her. She does not know what she is saying." "I saw you," Clara yelled, pointing at Crowley. "I saw your men. I heard them say your name. They said, 'Crowley will like this.' They were going to kill me. Edward, they were going to kill me to start this war so he could take the valley." Edward looked at Crowley, then back at Clara. His face twisted. The truth was staring him in the face, but accepting it meant destroying his career, his worldview, and his pride. "Clara, stop," Edward hissed. "You are embarrassing yourself. You have been through a terrible ordeal." "We will get you a doctor." "I do not need a doctor," Clara screamed. "I need you to arrest that man. He is a murderer." "That is enough," Crowley roared. He pulled his revolver. "She is mad. The Apaches have poisoned her mind, Sergeant. Secure her, the rest of you. Open fire on the canyon, wipe them out." "Belay that order," Captain Marlowe shouted, but confusion reigned. Soldiers looked from officer to officer. Crowley raised his gun. Not at the canyon, but toward Clara. "Get out of the way! Edward, she is gone!" Crack! A bullet struck the ground inches from Crowley's horse. The animal reared, throwing Crowley's aim off. "Up there!" a soldier screamed. High on the limestone ridge, a solitary figure stood outlined against the sun. He was not hiding. He stood tall, a Winchester rifle on his shoulder, the wind whipping his black hair. "It is the scout!" someone yelled. "It is Cade." Cade racked the lever of his rifle. His voice boomed down from the natural amphitheater of the cliffs. "Crowley," Cade shouted, "do you remember the Rio Verde? Do you remember the silver you threw in the dust?" Crowley's face went white. He scrambled to control his horse. "I am Cade Nantan," the warrior shouted. "I was the scout you paid to lead the butchery. I am the witness you forgot to kill. This woman speaks the truth. There are no hostile Apaches here, only families. The only murderer in this valley is Silas Crowley. Kill him!" Crowley shrieked. "Kill him now!" Crowley fired his revolver wildly at the cliff. The spell broke. Chaos erupted. "Defend the positions!" Marlowe shouted. But Crowley's hired guns opened fire on the ridge. From the rocks above, the Apache warriors revealed themselves. Lobo gave the signal. They did not fire a volley of death. They fired warning shots, pinning the soldiers down, creating dust and confusion. Edward stood in the middle of the crossfire, paralyzed. He looked at Clara, who was standing tall amidst the bullets, looking up at the ridge with love in her eyes. Love for the savage. Jealousy, hot and irrational, flooded Edward's veins. He saw Cade on the ridge, aiming again at Crowley. Edward drew his pistol. He did not aim at the Apaches. He aimed at the man who had stolen his property. He aimed at Cade. No. Clara saw Edward raise his arm. She did not think. She threw herself at Edward, grabbing his gun arm. "Damn it, Clara!" Edward shouted, trying to shove her away. The gun went off. The bullet went wide, but the struggle threw them both to the ground. Up on the ridge, Cade saw Clara fall. He saw Edward standing over her, gun in hand, his face twisted in a mask of rage. From that distance, it looked like an execution. Cade's heart stopped. The stone shattered completely. He had a clear shot at Crowley, the man who had ruined his life. But Edward was aiming his pistol down at Clara. There was no choice. There never had been. Cade shifted his aim. He exhaled, finding the stillness between heartbeats. He squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed like a cannon blast, down in the valley. Edward Hale jerked violently. His pistol flew from his hand. He clutched his right shoulder, spinning around and collapsing into the dust. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Captain Marlowe rode into the center of the fray, his saber drawn. "I will shoot the next man who pulls a trigger." The authority in his voice, combined with the shock of seeing a lieutenant down, froze the soldiers. Crowley, seeing his control slipping, tried to spur his horse toward the canyon exit. "Stop him," Marlowe commanded. Two sergeants grabbed Crowley's bridle, dragging the struggling tycoon from his saddle. "Let me go," Crowley screamed. "I own this railroad, I own you. You are under arrest. Mr. Crowley," Captain Marlowe said, his voice cold. "For conspiracy to commit murder and inciting a riot." Silence fell over the valley. The dust began to settle. Clara scrambled to her knees. She looked up at the ridge. Cade was still standing there. He had lowered his rifle. He looked down at her. He had shot a white officer. He had chosen her life over his own safety, over his vengeance against Crowley. He had crossed the line from which there was no return. Clara stood up, ignoring Edward, who was groaning in the dirt, attended by a medic. She began to run. She ran past the stunned soldiers, past the smoking guns, toward the trail that led up to the ridge. She found Cade halfway down the path. He had descended to meet her. He looked exhausted. His face was streaked with sweat and gun smoke. Clara slammed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in the dusty wool of his jacket. "You idiot," she sobbed. "You beautiful stone-headed idiot." Cade's arms went around her, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. He was shaking. "I could not let him hurt you," Cade whispered, his voice broken. "I could not." "It is over," Clara cried. "Marlowe arrested him." "It is over." Cade pulled back, looking into her eyes. "It is not over. Clara, I shot a lieutenant, even if he lives. I cannot go back to the army. I cannot go back to the town." "I know," Clara said, wiping the tears from her face. "Then we do not go back." Behind them, Lobo and the warriors emerged from the rocks. They did not look at Cade with suspicion anymore. They looked at him with respect. He had defended the tribe. He had defended the girl. Captain Marlowe rode up the lower slope, followed by two troopers. He stopped his horse 10 yards away. He looked at Crowley in chains down below, then at Cade and Clara. "Lieutenant Hale will survive," Marlowe said, his tone neutral. "Though his military career is likely finished, a shoulder wound takes a long time to heal." He looked at Cade. "Crowley will hang. His hired men are already turning evidence against him to save their own necks. Miss Whitfield's testimony will seal it." "And me?" Cade asked, his hand tightening on Clara's waist. Marlowe sighed. He pulled a cigar from his tunic and lit it. "As far as my report will state, the scout Cade Nantan was discharged from service yesterday. He was acting as a civilian defending a United States citizen from unlawful aggression." Marlowe blew a ring of smoke. "However, the railroad will still come. Son, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it is coming. If I were you, I would take the girl and go deep. Go where the tracks cannot follow." "Thank you, Captain," Clara said softly. Marlowe tipped his hat. "Do not thank me. Miss Whitfield, just make sure he takes care of you. You are a hell of a woman." The captain turned his horse and rode back down to the chaotic scene below. Cade and Clara stood alone on the trail. The sun was high now, bathing the red rocks in a golden light. "He is right," Cade said. "The world is closing in." "Let it close," Clara said, taking his hand. "We have our own world now." She looked at the blood on his jacket, at the gun in his hand, and then at the stronghold below where the women were beginning to emerge from the shelters. "Take me home, Cade," she said. Cade nodded. The stone was gone. In its place was fertile earth, ready for planting. "Let's go home," he said. They turned and walked back up the trail, hand in hand, leaving the smoke and the lies of civilization behind them, disappearing into the heart of the mountains. The climax had passed. The fire had burned away the chaff, leaving only what was real. The dust of the battle did not settle for hours. It hung in the canyon air like a golden shroud, suspended in the heat. But the silence that followed was heavier than the dust. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken, leaving wreckage and clarity in its wake. Down in the valley, the United States cavalry was preparing to depart. It was a somber procession. Silas Crowley sat in the back of a prison wagon, his wrists bound in iron, his expensive suit ruined by the red dirt. He did not look like a tycoon anymore. He looked small, a man whose power had evaporated the moment the truth was shouted from the ridge. But the wagon carried a heavier burden. Lieutenant Edward Hale had not survived the hour. The bullet from Cade's rifle had shattered his collarbone and severed an artery. Despite the frantic efforts of the regimental surgeon, the man who had come to the territory to build a career and claim a bride had bled out on the floor of the valley he tried to conquer. He died not with a prayer, but with a look of confused betrayal on his face, unable to comprehend that his blind adherence to order had led him to chaos. Captain Marlowe stood near the water's edge, signing a document resting on his saddle. He handed the paper to Lobo. "This is a temporary stay of execution for the land," Marlowe said, his voice gruff to hide his fatigue. "I am declaring this valley a protected zone pending a federal investigation into the Silver Star Rail Company. No blasting, no soldiers, for now." Lobo took the paper. He did not read English, but he understood the weight of the moment. He nodded once. "The water remains ours." "For now," Marlowe repeated, emphasizing the fragility of the promise. He looked up toward the trail where Clara and Cade had disappeared. "Tell the girl. Tell her she did well." With a command shouted down the line, the column moved out. The rumble of wheels and the jingle of spurs faded, leaving the stronghold to the wind and the Apaches. Up in the high wicket, the victory felt less like triumph and more like survival. Cade had collapsed the moment they reached the shelter. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the standoff drained away, revealing the extent of his injuries. He had taken a grazing bullet to the ribs during the initial suppression fire, and the recoil of the heavy rifle against his bruised shoulder had torn open the knife wound Victor had given him days before. He lay on a pile of buffalo robes, his breathing shallow and ragged. His skin was burning. Clara moved around the small space with a focused intensity. She was no longer the girl who had fainted from thirst. She was a woman who had seen death and chosen life. She boiled water over the fire. She crushed the creosote leaves Cade had taught her to identify. She tore the last of her petticoats into bandages. Lobo entered the tent. The old chief looked at his nephew, then at the white woman wringing out a cloth. For the first time since Clara had arrived in the valley, Lobo's face did not hold a scowl. "He is strong," Lobo said in broken English. "But the fire is inside him now. The fever." "I will bring it down," Clara said firmly. She placed the cool cloth on Cade's forehead. "He saved us, I will save him." Lobo watched her for a moment longer. Then a faint smile touched his lips, a rare, fleeting thing, like a flower on a cactus. "You are stubborn, girl. Good. An Apache must be stubborn." He left them alone. For the next 3 days, time blurred. Cade drifted in and out of consciousness. The infection in his shoulder fought a war against his blood. Clara did not sleep. She sat by his side, wiping his face, forcing water between his cracked lips, changing the dressings. When her eyes grew too heavy, she would lean her head against his good arm and doze for 10 minutes, only to wake at the slightest change in his breathing. It was a strange, intimate existence. In the silence of the tent, stripped of the outside world, they were just a man and a woman fighting for a future. On the 4th night, the fever peaked. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, sounding like the screams of dying men. Cade began to thrash on the pallet. His eyes flew open, but they did not see Clara. They saw ghosts. "No!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Do not shoot! The flag is white, Captain! The flag is white!" He tried to rise, his muscles straining against the pain. "They are women! Stop the guns!" Clara grabbed his shoulders, trying to push him back down. "Cade, it is over. You are safe." "Blood," Cade gasped, tears streaming from his unseeing eyes. "Silver in the dust. I killed them. I led them to the slaughter." He was back at the Rio Verde. He was back in the moment that had turned his heart to stone. He was reliving the guilt that had eaten him alive for 10 years. "It was not your fault," Clara whispered, leaning close to his ear. He did not hear her. He was shaking violently. "I have no home," he moaned. "Traitor, no home." Clara realized that medicine alone would not save him. The fever was feeding on his guilt. He needed an anchor. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. She spoke not in English, but in the clumsy, broken words she had learned from the children over the past weeks. Nantan, Cade, Shima, warrior. Cade, my home. The sound of his own language, spoken in her soft voice, pierced the fog. Cade blinked. His eyes focused on her face, the blue eyes, the golden hair, the fierce determination. "Clara," he rasped. "I am here," she said, switching back to English, her thumb stroking his cheek. "You are not at the Rio Verde. You are in the stronghold. You saved the valley. You saved me." She took his hand and placed it over her own heart. "Feel this, I am alive because of you. You are not a destroyer. Cade, you are a protector." Cade stared at her. The ghost began to recede, chased away by the warmth of her skin. The tension left his body. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "You stayed," he whispered, as if it were a miracle. "I told you," Clara said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I have already stripped bare." "I am not going anywhere." Cade closed his eyes. The fever broke an hour later, the heat sweating out of him, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He slept, and this time, his sleep was dreamless. Recovery was a slow, frustrating season. As the weeks passed, the color returned to Cade's face, but his shoulder remained stiff. He could not hunt. He could not ride. For a man who defined his worth by his utility to the tribe, being an invalid was a torture worse than the fever. He would sit outside the wickiup, whittling wood with an angry precision, watching the other men bring in deer. "You are growling like a bear with a thorn in its paw," Clara said one afternoon, sitting beside him with a basket of corn. "I am useless," Cade muttered. "A warrior who cannot lift a bow is just another mouth to feed." "You are healing," Clara corrected him. "And while you heal, you can be useful in other ways." "How?" "By weaving baskets." "By teaching," Clara said. She nodded toward the group of children sitting near the fire. "They want to know about the world out there, the world that is coming for them, whether we like it or not. If they cannot fight it with arrows, they must fight it with words." Cade looked at the children. He looked at Clara. So, a new routine began. In the mornings, Clara taught the children the English alphabet, scratching letters into the dirt with a stick. She taught them how to read the treaties that men like Crowley used as weapons. In the afternoons, the children and Cade taught Clara. They taught her the names of the plants, the rhythm of the songs, and the history of the stars. Two worlds, previously colliding in violence, began to touch in peace. Clara learned that the Apache word for water was life. Cade learned that not all English words were lies. One evening, little Naya, the girl whose leg Clara had bandaged, ran up to Clara and held out a flower. "Thank you." "Teacher," Naya said in heavily accented English. Clara beamed. Cade watched from the doorway of the tent. The stone in his chest was gone, replaced by a warmth that scared him more than any bullet. He was becoming happy, and happiness, he knew, was a fragile thing in the desert. 6 weeks after the battle, Captain Marlowe returned. He came with a small escort, riding under a flag of truce. He met with Lobo and Cade at the edge of the valley. Clara stood by Cade's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a public claim that no one in the tribe questioned anymore. "Crowley has been sentenced," Marlowe said, dismounting. 20 years in federal prison. The testimony of his own men damned him. The scandal has reached Washington. The Silver Star Rail Company has lost its charter for this route. Cade nodded. "Good. However," Marlowe continued, looking at the red walls of the canyon, "I must be honest with you. The railroad is a hydra. You cut off one head, 2 more grow. Another company will come. Maybe in 3 years, maybe 5. They will bring better lawyers and more politicians. We will be ready," Cade said. "I hope so," Marlowe said. He reached into his saddlebag. "I have one more piece of business. I have a visitor who insisted on riding with us." Marlowe stepped aside. From the back of the small column, an older man rode forward on tired mare. He wore a dusty suit and a hat that had seen better days. He looked aged, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with the deep grooves of worry and regret. "Papa," Clara whispered. Thomas Whitfield slid off his horse. He stood uncertainly, looking at the Apache warriors, then at Cade, and finally at his daughter. He had expected to find her broken. He had expected to find a prisoner. Instead, he saw a woman standing tall in buckskin, her skin bronzed by the sun, looking stronger than he had ever seen her. "Clara," Thomas said, his voice cracking. Clara ran to him. They embraced in the middle of the dusty clearing. Thomas held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. I thought I had lost you," he sobbed. "I am so sorry. Clara, I am so sorry." He pulled back, looking at her. Then, he did something that silenced the entire clearing. Thomas Whitfield turned to Lobo and bowed his head. It was a clumsy gesture, but sincere. "Thank you," Thomas said. "Thank you for not being the monsters I was told you were." Then he turned to Cade. The rancher looked at the warrior who had been vilified by every newspaper in the territory. "And you," Thomas said, "I know what you did. You shot a man to save her. You stood against an army. I do not know how to repay that debt." "There is no debt," Cade said quietly. "She saved herself. I just held the door." Thomas looked back at Clara. "Come home. Clara, the ranch is safe now. Crowley is gone. We can start over. You can have your room back. You can have your books. You can be safe." The offer hung in the air. Safety. A bed with sheets. Tea in china cups. The life she was born to live. Cade stepped back. He physically created distance between himself and Clara. His face went neutral, shielding his heart. "Go," Cade said softly. "He is right. This life, it is hard. The winter is coming. The army will come back one day. You do not belong in the dirt. Clara." He was giving her an out. He was loving her enough to let her go. He was looking at her with eyes that said, "I will not hold you prisoner, not even with the love." Clara looked at her father. She saw the love and the fear in his eyes. She looked at the trail leading back to Silver Creek, back to civilization. Then she looked at Cade. She saw the scar on his shoulder. She saw the way he stood proud, solitary, but with a hand slightly reached out, as if waiting for her to take it. She remembered the night in the tent, the innocent girl stripped bare. She remembered the moment she realized that civilization was the place where men like Crowley and Edward ruled, and savagery was the place where a community healed a wounded child. "I cannot go back. Papa?" Clara said. Thomas blinked. "What?" "Why, it is your home." "No," Clara said gently. "It was your home, and it was a cage. I was a doll there. Papa, something to be dressed up and sold to the highest bidder to save the ranch." Thomas flinched as if slapped, but he did not deny it. "I have found something here," Clara continued. "I am teaching the children. I am helping them understand the treaties so they do not get cheated again. I am useful here. I am real." She turned to Cade. She walked the 3 steps he had retreated, closing the distance. She took his hand, the rough, scarred hand of the scout, and laced her fingers through his. "And I love him," she said simply. The silence was absolute. Thomas Whitfield looked at the Apache warrior holding his daughter's hand. He saw the way Cade looked at her not with possession, but with a reverence that Edward Hale had never possessed. Thomas sighed, a long, rattling sound of resignation and acceptance. He nodded. "I see," Thomas said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled parchment. "I cannot make you come, but I can give you this." He handed the scroll to Clara. "It is a deed," Thomas said, "for the northern pasture, the land that touches the canyon mouth. It is the buffer zone. I'm signing it over to you. As long as I live, no cattle will graze there, no railroad surveyors will cross it. It is a bridge." Clara took the deed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, Papa." Thomas mounted his horse. He looked at Cade one last time. "You take care of her, son, or I will come back with a shotgun. I will guard her with my life." Cade vowed. Thomas rode away with Captain Marlowe. He rode away without his daughter, but he rode away with his conscience cleaner than it had been in years. Clara stood watching the dust settle. She was standing between two worlds no longer. She had chosen her ground. Cade squeezed her hand. "You gave up everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Soft beds, ice in the summer, safety." Clara turned to him. She reached up and touched the scar on his cheek. "I chose the man who melted," she whispered. "The rest is just furniture." Cade smiled a true, wide smile that transformed his face. Breaking the last remnants of the stone mask, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her under the vast, open sky of the stronghold. They were not safe. The future was a storm cloud on the horizon, but for now, in the falling action of their lives, they had found a place to stand. They had built a home not out of wood and brick, but out of truth and blood, and that was enough. November arrived with a bite in the wind that tasted of frost and juniper. The heat that had nearly killed Clara Whitfield in the desert months ago had retreated, replaced by a crisp, golden light that made the Dragoon Mountains look less like the walls of a prison and more like the spires of a cathedral. The stronghold had changed. It was subtle, like the turning of a leaf, but the shift was undeniable. On a Tuesday morning, a wagon rattled down the narrow track leading to the valley floor. It was driven by Thomas Whitfield. 4 months ago, the arrival of a white man's wagon would have been met with drawn bows and the click of rifle hammers. Today, it was met with cautious curiosity. Thomas pulled the reins, bringing his team of mules to a halt near the communal fire. He looked older. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by the terror of almost losing his daughter and the shame of nearly selling her. But his back was straighter. He stepped down, dusting off his coat. He did not carry a gun. He carried a crate of wool blankets and sacks of coffee. "Lobo." Thomas nodded to the chief who sat on a buffalo robe. "Thomas," Lobo replied. The old Apache did not rise, but he gestured to the space beside the fire. "The coffee smells good. It is fresh from Santa Fe." Thomas said, "I thought, well, winter is coming. The wool is thick." It was a trade. It was commerce. But in the West, where blood was usually the only currency exchanged between these two worlds, a sack of coffee was a peace treaty. Clara watched from the entrance of the wickiup she now shared with the women of the tribe. She was grinding corn, her hands calloused, her face browned by the sun. She wore a dress made of buckskin, soft and durable. With beadwork, she was slowly learning to sew herself. She watched her father sit with the Apache elders. She watched them haggle not over land or water, but over the price of sugar and the quality of leather. It was mundane, it was ordinary, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Your father drives a hard bargain," a voice rumbled behind her. Clara turned. Cade stood there. He was no longer the broken man who had lain feverish on the pallet. He stood tall, his shoulder healed, though he moved with a slight stiffness that the winter cold aggravated. He was not wearing his army jacket. That blue coat, the symbol of his time between worlds, had been burned in a quiet ceremony weeks ago. Now, He wore a shirt of simple cotton and a vest of deerskin. But the biggest change was in his face. The mask of stone was gone. The jagged tension that used to pull at the corners of his mouth had smoothed out. He reached out and took the heavy grinding stone from her hands. "Let me," he said. "I can do it." Clara smiled, though she let him take it. "I know you can," Cade said. He set the stone down and looked at her. He looked at her not with the starving desperation of the man in the cave, but with the steady, warm gaze of a man who knows exactly where he belongs. "But you have been working since sunrise. Come, the children are asking for you." They walked together through the camp. There were no whispers anymore. The tribe had accepted Clara not as a guest, but as a fixture. She was the Nantan Idzan, the warrior's woman, though they had not yet spoken the words of binding. A group of boys ran past, chasing a hoop with sticks. One of them, little Victor, named after the warrior who had once tried to kill Clara. A name reclaimed for peace, tripped and fell near Cade's boots. In the past, Cade would have stepped aside, afraid to touch the innocence he felt he had lost. Now, he reached down, scooped the boy up, and set him on his feet. "Watch the stones, little badger," Cade said, dusting off the boy's knees. The boy laughed and ran off. Clara watched Cade's hands, the hands that had killed men, the hands that had been whipped, the hands that were now gentle enough to brush dust from a child. "You are good with them," she said softly. Cade looked at the retreating children. They are the only thing that matters. The land and the children. Everything else is just dust. He turned to her, and his expression grew serious. "Lobo spoke to me this morning. He says the winter moon is coming. He says it is time." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Time for what?" "Time to stop walking two paths," Cade said. "Time to make the trail one." The proposal was not made on one knee with a diamond mined from the blood of the earth. It was made with a statement of intent, delivered with the solemnity of a court sentence and the tenderness of a prayer. "We do not have a priest," Clara said later that afternoon, sitting by the stream. Panic fluttered in her chest, no doubt, but the ingrained anxiety of her upbringing. "I do not have a dress. I do not have a ring. My mother, she always talked about the lace veil she saved for me." She looked down at her buckskin skirt. "I look like a trapper." Cade sat on the rock beside her. He took her hand, turning it over to trace the lines of her palm. "We do not need a priest to tell the sky what it already knows," Cade said, "and we do not need lace. You are Clara. That is all the adornment you need." He reached into his pouch. "But I have something for the ring." He pulled out two objects. They were bracelets, woven intricately from leather. But as Clara looked closer, she gasped. The leather was not new. It was braided from strips of the gray wool dress she had worn on the stagecoach, the dress she had torn apart to bandage his wounds, the dress she had shed the night she told him to melt. And woven into the gray wool were small, rough stones, turquoise, the color of the sky, the color of water, the color of her eyes. "I kept the scraps," Cade said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "From the night you saved me, from the night you stripped bare, I braided them with the earth-colored leather, 2 strands, one from your world, one from mine." Clara ran her fingers over the rough weave. It was not gold, it was not polished, it was scarred and textured and utterly unbreakable. "It is perfect," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "It is better than a ring." "Lobo will speak the words at sunset," Cade said. "Will you stand with me?" "I would stand with you in the middle of a fire." Clara answered, "Good." Cade smiled, a slow, crooked expression that made her knees weak. "Because the fire is easy. It is the living that is hard." The ceremony took place on the high ridge overlooking the valley, the same ridge where Cade had stood with his rifle to defy the army. Now, there were no guns. There was only the wind singing through the slot canyons and the rhythmic, heartbeat thrum of a single drum. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with veins of fire orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. The entire tribe had gathered in a wide circle. Thomas Whitfield stood among them, holding his hat in his hands. looking uncomfortable but respectful. Lobo stood in the center, wearing his ceremonial robes, holding a feather fan and a bowl of burning sage. Cade and Clara stepped into the circle. They did not hold hands yet. They stood facing each other, 2 feet apart. The distance represented the individuality of their spirits. Lobo spoke in Apache first, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. Then he switched to English, for the benefit of the woman and her father. "This man is of the stone and the storm," Lobo said, gesturing to Cade. "He has walked in the dark places. He has carried the weight of 2 worlds." Lobo turned to Clara. "This woman is of the sun and the iron. She came as a captive, but she stays as a warrior. She walked through the fire and did not burn." The old chief stepped between them, wafting the sage smoke over their heads. "Marriage in the white world is a contract," Lobo said sternly. "It is paper. Here, it is a promise to the land. You do not just marry each other. You marry the wind that blows here. You marry the drought that will come. You marry hunger and plenty. You promise that your hearts will beat as one drum. To protect this place." He looked at Cade. "Do you take this path?" Cade Nantan. "I'll take it," Cade said. His voice was not loud, but it resonated like a bell. He looked at Clara, and in his eyes, she saw the reflection of the sunset. She saw the man who had ridden through a dust storm to save her. She saw the man who had shot an officer to save her. "Do you take this path, Clara Whitfield?" Clara looked at him. She thought of the girl she had been, the girl in the corset, reading novels about romance, thinking love was a polite conversation in a parlor. That girl was a ghost. The woman standing here had dirt under her fingernails and a scar on her ankle. The woman standing here knew that love was not soft. It was the hardest thing in the world, because it required you to be completely real. "I'll take it," Clara said. "With all my heart." "Then bind them," Lobo commanded. Cade stepped forward. He took the bracelet he had made, the one with the turquoise, and tied it around Clara's wrist. His fingers were warm and steady. "You are my water," he whispered, so only she could hear. "You are the rain that softens the earth." Clara took the other bracelet, the one made of dark leather and the gray wool, and tied it around his thick wrist. "You are my stone," she whispered back. "You are the foundation that holds me up." Lobo raised his hands. "It is done. Walk one path." The drum beat faster. The tribe erupted in a series of high-pitched trills and shouts of celebration. It was not the polite applause of a church wedding. It was a primal, joyous noise that echoed off the canyon walls. Thomas Whitfield walked forward. He looked out of place in his dusty suit, but his eyes were wet. He approached the couple. He reached into his coat pocket. He did not have a gift of silver or china. He pulled out a folded piece of thick parchment. "I cannot give you a house," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You would not live in it anyway. And I cannot give you money, because there is nowhere here to spend it." He handed the parchment to Cade. "This is the deed to the north section," Thomas said. 600 acres. It includes the mouth of the canyon and the creek that runs to the river. It is the buffer. As of this morning, it belongs to Clara Whitfield and Cade Nantan. Cade looked at the paper. It was a legal shield. It meant that if the railroad came back, or if the army came back, they would have to cross private property owned by a veteran and a citizen. It was a powerful weapon in a changing world. "Thank you," Cade said, extending his hand. Thomas took it. The grip was firm. A rancher and a scout, a father and a son-in-law. The bridge was built. "Be happy," Thomas said to Clara, kissing her cheek. "That is all I ever wanted. Be happy." The celebration lasted late into the night. There was venison roasting over the fires, and stories told in 2 languages. But eventually, the fires dimmed. The guests retreated to their wickiups. Thomas took his bedroll to the guest shelter. Cade and Clara walked away from the main camp, up a small rise to where Cade had built a new shelter. It was larger than the others, positioned to look out over the valley floor. Inside, a small fire crackled in the pit. Buffalo robes were spread thick on the ground. Clara stood by the fire, untying the sash of her dress. She felt a sudden shyness returning, a flutter of nerves. Cade moved behind her. He did not speak. He stepped close, his chest brushing against her back. He reached out and placed his large, warm hands on her waist. It was a gesture he had made months ago, when he had hoisted her onto his horse as a prisoner. Back then, his touch had been a cage. Now, his hand slid up her sides, slow and reverent. He rested his chin on the top of her head. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "No," Clara breathed, leaning back into him. "I am not afraid. I am home." Cade turned her around in his arms. The firelight danced across his face, illuminating the scar on his cheek, making it look like a badge of honor. "I was empty for 10 years, Cade said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a hollow man walking in the dust. I thought I would die that way. I wanted to die that way." He raised his hand and cupped her face. "You filled me. Clara, you stripped the stone away and planted a garden in the rock. We will grow things here," Clara promised, placing her hand over his heart. "We will grow a life." Cade kissed her. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the battlefield. It was a slow, deep claim. It was the kiss of a man who had all the time in the world. He lowered her onto the robes. The shadows danced on the canvas walls, closing them in, protecting them from the vastness of the desert night. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the fire burned steady and warm. The heart of stone had melted. It had poured itself into the mold of a woman's love, and it had hardened again not into rock, but into iron, strong, resilient, and capable of bending without breaking. The story ends not in the dark, but in the light. The next morning, the sun rose over the Dragoon Mountains, painting the sky in shades of apricot and violet. The air was cold and clean. In the center of the camp, a group of children sat in the dirt, wrapped in blankets. They were looking at a smooth patch of sand where Clara had used a stick to draw 4 large letters. H-O-M-E. The children chanted in unison. "Home," Clara said, smiling. "It means where the heart is, where you belong." "Home," little Naya repeated, pointing to the wiki-up. "Yes," Clara said. "Home." 30 yards away, Cade stood leaning against the wooden post of a corral. He was watching his wife teach. He had a mug of Thomas's coffee in his hand. He looked out at the valley. He knew the peace would not last forever. He knew the railroad would try again. He knew the politicians in Washington were drawing lines on maps they had never seen. The future was a storm cloud on the horizon, dark and heavy. But Cade took a sip of the coffee and looked back at Clara. She laughed at something a child said, her head thrown back, her hair shining like gold in the morning sun. He was ready for the storm. He had a rifle, he had a deed, and he had a reason to fight. He looked down at his boots. They were standing in the red dirt. The earth was hard, but tiny green shoots of grass were pushing up through the crust, defying the drought, defying the heat. Cade smiled. It was a small, private smile. "Home," he whispered to the wind. He pushed off the post and walked toward the circle of children, his stride long and easy. A man walking on his own land, toward the woman who had saved his soul. Thank you so much for listening to this story. The Apache's heart was stone. It has been a long journey from the dusty stagecoach trail to the heart of the Dragoon Mountains. I hope you felt every mile of the ride. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe somewhere in the American West itself? Please leave a comment down below and share your location and your thoughts on Cade and Clara's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Do not forget to hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support helps me keep the campfire burning and the stories flowing. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.